And that was the crucial moment, I think, that when we saw that the Athenians were really taking charge.
Suddenly, flush with wealth, Pericles embarked on a public building program, the scale, cost, and magnificence of which had never before been seen. And so began the great flowering of Athenian culture, known as the Golden Age. In a sweeping, spare-no-expense building program, Pericles first had the long walls from the city to the port of Piraeus completed, a move designed to withstand any future siege. Athens soon became an island of invincible fortification, importing food and supplies from Crimea and Egypt, her powerful navy poised to repel any Spartan attempt to threaten supply lines.
It's a commercial centre as well as a naval, military centre. So the Athenians had, so long as they controlled Piraeus and the access to it, they were pretty much secure from their grain supply being interrupted.
Pericles also ordered work to begin on the temple complex atop the Acropolis, destroyed 30 years earlier by the marauding Persian army.
Much of the optimism of Athenian culture in the 5th century comes from the victory over the Persians, which is the classical period of Greek culture, the period of heroic sculpture, of the tragedies of Aeschylus and Sophocles and Euripides, of the comedies of Aristophanes, of the histories of Herodotus and Thucydides.
The brilliant philosophers Socrates and Plato were also products of the time. But perhaps the most spectacular achievement of all was the Parthenon, or House of the Virgin Goddess. Housed inside this magnificent marble structure was a giant ivory and gold sculpture of Athena, believed to be the divine champion of Athenian military power. If built today, the Parthenon would cost over $500 million, and it has endured as the masterpiece of Greek architecture. Under the astute leadership of Pericles, Athens became the center of intellectual and cultural life in the Aegean. A glittering city of some 60,000 citizens, it stood in stark contrast to grim Sparta, where the mounting influence of its neighbor to the northeast was cause for great alarm.
I think the Spartans, when they see Athens as a rising power, the first thing they think is kill it, swat it, destroy it. We can't have rising powers. We can't have competitors.
And so, by the middle of the 5th century BC, Athens and Sparta, the two most powerful city-states in Greece, were on the verge of full-scale war. By 450 BC, the balance of power had shifted from Sparta to Athens, where the Golden Age blossomed in all its splendor. In Sparta, however, this display of extravagance was greeted with fear and suspicion. More and more, the Spartans were feeling threatened by Athens' growing power.
The Spartans are always very arrogant people, and for the Spartans, it's really important to be able to thrust their chest out and say, I'm number one, I'm top dog, and nobody else is top dog.
To hammer home that point, the Spartan army invaded Attica in 446 BC, and shortly after, the Athenians offered a truce. The 30 years' peace was agreed upon by both sides the next year, and with it, the First Peloponnesian War ended. Sparta was content to turn inward, much as the United States did following World War I. However, over the next 10 years, the Athenians continued to interfere with the members of the Peloponnesian League, practically baiting Sparta out of its isolationism.
Athens went all over the place, up in Macedonia and Thrace and in the Aegean islands, and crushed smaller cities and settlements that were friendly to Sparta. This was naturally perceived by the Spartans as the first but unmistakable steps of marching against Sparta itself.
The
Corinthians, really one of Sparta's most important allies, are absolutely convinced that Athens intends to break the Peloponnesian League to become the imperial hegemon of the entire Aegean. But the Spartans constantly pull back. They're not eager to take on these Athenians. It's not going to be an easy war. They're clear on that. The Athenians have a navy that they can't imagine confronting. Sparta simply doesn't have an effective navy to respond with.
Building and manning a formidable navy took vast amounts of capital, and the Spartans had long rejected any form of money, believing it led to inequality at home and needless temptations from the outside.
They don't even have coinage of their own. So a fleet of 200 ships has 40,000 men apart from Marines, that is to say from hoplites who serve with the fleet. That's a lot of human beings to be fed. The Athenians have a system for raising that money in order to support the fleet. The Spartans have nothing of the sort.
And so Sparta remained defiant, refusing to be dragged into war. But the Spartans were forced to listen when the members of the Peloponnesian League called an emergency meeting in 432 BC. Many cities denounced Athens to the allies assembled at Sparta. By doing nothing, they said, the Spartans were encouraging the Athenians to commit further acts of aggression.
Therefore, discontent, distrust arose along with the sentiment that this could be settled only by war and not through peaceful negotiations.
Sparta's stated aim in ending the 30 Years' peace was to liberate Greece by restoring autonomy to Greek states subject to Athens. The Spartan strategy was simple: march on Attica and engage the Athenians in a land battle.
And so they mobilized probably the biggest single army that the Peloponnesian League has ever fielded. It may have been 50 to 60,000 men. And in late spring of 431, they march northward through the isthmus up to the Megarian plain, and they go into the plain of Attica.
This was the infamous Spartan war machine that enemies so feared, and Pericles was determined to avoid a head-to-head battle. Instead, he came up with a two-pronged strategy: offense by sea, defense by land. At sea, the Athenian navy set sail with 100 warships called triremes. Their mission? To conduct covert raids on the Peloponnesus. On land, Pericles' plan was more controversial. In fact, it was a totally unconventional approach to war.
Pericles' strategy was this. It was to avoid, at all costs, the standard way of fighting a war. A battle between hoplites of one side against hoplites of the other.
Pericles decides to evacuate the 200,000 acres of Attica and send its population of farmers with their families, perhaps over 100,000 altogether, inside the walls of Athens, and to ride out these invasions on the premise that Athens can be supplied by sea.
We've got a secure port. We've got massive walls around our city. We can import all the food we want. We can keep control of our empire.
They could do that because they could collect money from their imperial empire. They could maintain a fleet. They could rule the seas. It was all perfect.
Spartan has no tradition of siegecraft, so they're not going to be able to breach the walls of Athens. But they have this tradition of Greek warfare that you march into an enemy's sacred land. It's an affront to their masculinity, it's an affront to their sovereignty, it's an affront to their national pride, and you hack away a few olive trees, you burn a few acres of grain, and the enraged farmers in their frenzy come out to meet you on a plain, and then you wipe them out, and the issue is settled.
But the Athenians refused to budge. Instead, they remained barricaded inside the city, further protected by separate walls, including the long walls that extended nearly 5 miles to the harbor at Piraeus.
The Spartans are pretty much bamboozled by this. This isn't good. And this basically leaves the Spartans with no response. The Spartan system was based on, when we move into your territory, you move out, and we chop you to ribbons.
Frustrated, the Spartans continued to pillage the fields of Attica, an area the size of Rhode Island. But Sparta was ill-equipped to resupply such a massive army. So, waiting for the Athenians to come out and fight, was simply not an option. 1 month after their arrival, the despondent troops packed up and headed for home.
The first year, Pericles seems a genius, but he didn't count on the idea that a city that was designed to house perhaps 75 to 125,000 inhabitants was ill-equipped in the summer months to house 250 or 300,000 inhabitants. It doesn't have the sewage facilities, it doesn't have the water facilities, it doesn't have the housing.